Hi, I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ, and I'm in recovery, or actually recovered from a lifetime full of past failures, mistakes, and a lot of hurt. My name's Kerry. I was born to an awesome family. My mom and dad were ministers. I was the baby, so I had two brothers and a sister. I had one brother that I never met because he only lived 48 seconds. And his name was Randall, or Randy, but I never met him. But I knew about him. They told me about him, and it was like I had a brother, but I just never got to meet him. So we were living in Kansas at the time, and then that was during my preschool years, and then we moved to Colorado, which I loved. I fell in love with the mountains. Everything Colorado I fell in love with, and that was my elementary school years. It was a great time there, and wish I could say we stayed there, but we didn't. So later, my dad relocated to a church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So we went from Colorado to Oklahoma, and that's where some things happened that were good, but also a lot of bad. And so my brothers were in high school at this time. My sister was in getting ready to start high school, or close to later, at least later junior high. And then I was beginning my middle school, junior high years. But I remember when we first got there, Dad was speaking at a Bible school, and he was talking about heaven and hell. And I knew I didn't want to go to hell. So at the age of 11, I asked Jesus into my heart. Now I was serious about that because I didn't want to go to hell. So I have no doubts that my desire to have Jesus live in my heart was sincere, but there was so much more to it. And then life started happening to our family while we were in Oklahoma. And I won't give every detail because we don't have the time, but I will say this, that I remember driving home from church with Mom. Sometimes Mom and Dad would take different cars because Dad might have to go early or stay later or whatever the case may be. I remember I was driving home with Mom, and I was just a young boy, and she ran into this car, and long story short, the lady in the other car ended up in the hospital, and we were sued for $1 million, and we lost that lawsuit. And so the car insurance company dropped my dad, and there was just some things that started going on in while we were in Oklahoma that was not good. And one of the other major things that really impacted me as a young boy was when my dad found out. He was the associate pastor at this time of a large church in Oklahoma. The senior pastor, his name's Pete. Pete was having an affair with a lady of the church. And so my dad, being the kind and considerate guy he is, he went and spoke to Pete in a loving manner. And I'm going to make a long story very short. Pete just went berserk, threatened our family. I remember there were a couple times my dad took us out of state while all this was going on, and Pete ended up in prison. This really affected my dad and the whole family. In fact, Dad spent some time in the hospital. I guess what I'll call a nervous breakdown, but it really impacted the entire family while we were in Tulsa. Dad recovered from that ordeal and continued on in ministry. And then we relocated to Missouri in 1977. So my brothers had already graduated high school in Tulsa. So my sister and I went with my mom and dad to Doniphan, Missouri, small town in southeast Missouri. But I can tell you, had some good times there. I consider Doniphan my hometown, even to this day, even though I've been in Springfield since 1991, Springfield, Missouri, that is. So my high school years, I did a lot of stuff. I learned to play the guitar, started writing songs, but because some of the things that had happened, and there were other things along the course of my lifetime that really started making me think and question, not necessarily my faith, but what's this all about? It just seemed like there was stuff I was missing because I had more questions than answers. But then, so my dad was senior pastor at a church in Doniphan, Missouri. The church was growing. We had a youth pastor, and then we found out his wife was having an affair with the guy in the church. And it was though him, the youth pastor, that seemed to get punished by the denomination because of what his wife did. And this really started bugging me. But at the age of 16, I felt the call to the ministry, but I didn't want to follow through with that. I did not want to go into the ministry. Now, I loved serving, but I just did not want to go in full-time ministry. So I actually put a fleece out to God, and it was more I just needed a sign. And then God revealed to me and spoke to my heart, and I really believe that God called me. So after I graduated high school, my sister went off to Bible college. Both my brothers had went off to this Bible college, and so I followed in their footsteps. So after high school, I went off to a small Bible college in Houston, Texas, called Gulf Coast Bible College. And that's where, man, I was hit pretty hard. I remember in high school, I was bragging. We spent a lot of time on Current River, and it's a beautiful river. And I remember bragging to my high school buddy, David Jameson, hey, I swam across this certain area of the river, which was pretty wide, pretty deep, and there was an undercurrent because it was around a curve. And I was bragging, and he said, I'll outdo you one time. You know how we are as kids. And David Jameson was his name. And then my first weekend in Houston, Texas, get this phone call, and it is from one of the leaders at the church, and said, Kerry, I hate to tell you, but David has passed on. He drowned in Merrimack River, which was near St. Louis. And I started feeling guilty because I felt like this was he was trying to outdo me. And I really felt guilty about his death. But they reassured me that I was more of a positive impact in David's life than this little swimming competition we had going on, and it was not my fault. But still, that has stuck with me throughout my lifetime. But when they were prepping for his funeral, which I was not able to attend because I just relocated to Houston, but they grabbed his Bible, and he only had one verse underlined in it. Rejoice in the Lord always, Philippians 4:4. That's the only verse David had underlined in his Bible. And David had a great, great, great attitude towards life no matter what went on around him. And I'll never forget David, and I'll never forget that verse. Well, the next few years I would focus on school. I say few years. Year and a half for sure in school and ministry, because at the Bible college they wanted us to be involved in ministry. So I started volunteering at the Star Hope Rescue Mission downtown Houston, Texas, and that's the first time where I ever saw someone use newspapers as a blanket sleeping outside. Now it didn't get too cold down there, but still that sight alone impacted me. Then in Houston, Texas, seen a lot of stuff. A guy in a neighborhood close to where we lived at a dorm, he was beating his wife, and we called 911, and then the wife would not press charges, and the guy ended up going free. There were some other things that went on I won't go into while I was there at the Bible college, and I grew discontented with what was happening. Could be I just took my eyes off the prize. I don't know, except it seemed like I did not want to stay. And so I left, went back to my hometown. And that's just where life started falling apart. Met this girl named Nancy who had 2 kids. Now, there's some things that is ironic. Because of my dad's reputation, I had churches reach out to me and ask me to come preach. And this was before the internet, or at least me being on the internet. This was before. It was just word of mouth advertisement. And hey, Kerry's back in the area. And so I started preaching in the area, even though I'm going through this transition in life. And I'd met this gal who had 2 kids. And then, long story short, we were at this church. I had asked her and the two kids to come with me. It was a Sunday night, and I was speaking on how Jesus is our Father. Now, the background story behind Nancy and her two kids was she was divorced. Her husband used to beat her and the two kids. And this night when I was speaking about how Jesus can be her Father, I'll never forget this, and it has stuck with me to this day. The youngest little boy came to me after that service. He goes, "Carrie, I've seen my dad beat my mom and beat my brother, and he's beat me. And this little boy, probably 5 years old, was crying. He said, but now I know I can have a father in Jesus that won't beat me." The very next day, I went to talk to a preacher friend of mine, and he proceeded to tell me how he started calling churches in the area to not have me come speak because I was dating a divorced woman. This broke my heart, and it hurt badly, and I was really struggling with some of the things that I experienced in life, and that was one that was very difficult. And so at this time, my mom and dad had relocated to a small community in Saltville, Virginia. Beautiful, beautiful community. And it was there that after several months of successful ministry and the church was growing, that dad got sick. And long story short, all of us decided, because what happened, the Bible College in Houston, Texas, relocated to Oklahoma City. And so all of us decided to relocate to Oklahoma. My sister was close to graduating with her bachelor's. My brother and his wife were going to bring mom and dad to Oklahoma City. I was going to go back to the school. And so we all relocated to Oklahoma City. And so I asked Nancy and her two boys, not necessarily to go because of me, but if they wanted a fresh start, maybe they could relocate as well. And of course, at that time, if you're divorced and you have kids and you want to move out of state, you had to get permission by the ex spouse or the father of the children, and he would not sign off on that. And so I felt like I'm going to be her savior. And so I totally turned my back on my family, went back to my hometown to where everything fell apart because I had let the outside distractions keep me off what God had called me to at the age of 16. And I think my whole story can be summed up is that for me, I knew what God called me to do, but I would let the outside chaos, if you will, impact my decision making. And so I went back to help her, and that was my first moral failure. I really feel like as I drove back, I heard God say, don't do this. I will take care of them. Don't you do this. And I did it. And then it really broke my dad's heart. I really did a number on my family. And it was at that time, because of the remorse and the guilt of all that had gone on, it was then that I tried to take my own life. But because that was not successful, some friends from the church took me in, started working with me, comforting me, praying for me. And so I made another deal for God. I'll go back to school, pursue that degree. And then I just knew Dad needed to be back into the ministry. So God did a mighty, mighty work in my dad's life, figured out what was going on. And then Dad and Mom relocated to Columbia, Missouri. I did go back to the school and got my Associate of Arts. And then I went up to Columbia. I felt like I owed it to them to help them out because of what I did. And then I transferred all my credits to the University of Missouri in the Religious Studies Department. And then out of the blue, I get this call to be a children's and youth pastor here in Springfield, Missouri. Even with all the stuff that I had been going through and dealing with, It's like God says, I don't care what's going on, and I don't care about what you've done in your past. I still want to use you. So relocated to Springfield. Mom and Dad were doing good. Transferred all my credits again to, well, back in the day it was SMS, now Missouri State University, where I end up getting in my bachelor's. And so fast forward to 1992, three things happened. I decided to join the military. I got engaged, and I was finishing my education to get my Bachelor's of Arts in Religious Studies. It's quite a journey. It took me 10 years to get a 4-year degree. I never was good at math, but I can tell you during this time, so we got married in 1992. I did what they call a split option. So I was I did basic training, finished my degree, and then we were going to go to Fort Sam Houston. We got married in between that, and then she came down to Fort Sam Houston with me. But what I didn't know, I was on a 10-week lockdown, basically basic training all over again to go through medic school, and then I was going to go through an LPN school. So I was going to be there at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio for about a year at least. But because she was down there now, she was by herself for an extended period of time. By the time I got to move off site, after I finished Bravo, it's called Bravo School, but it's really a medic school, like being a paramedic or EMT. By the time I got home, I was able to move off site with her. She got pregnant, and we were expecting our first baby, but that's also when we found out she had cervical cancer. Then the Army screwed up my pay for 6 months, and it just, if everything could go wrong, it went wrong. Well, our child was born 9 months later. I didn't finish the school because of what was going on, but they kept me there on student status because of her condition, and so I'm grateful for that. And so she had her baby, but because of all that went on, they did get the cancer. So she was like, I don't want no part of this military life. And so she left when Forrest was our baby. We named him Forrest. Forrest was 3 months old, and she left, took him, and took her car. And there I was once again, left with more questions than answers. So the next few years consisted of Army life, being a part-time dad, and trying to rebuild my life, but I was so empty inside by this time. Then September 11th occurred, which changed the course of a lot of people, that, especially those of us that were in the military. And that calling back when I was 16, it took a turn, but God started doing something that I never would have envisioned. God started using me to reach out to veterans and current military. In fact, I wrote a song in 2003 called Freedom Song. We released it as a single. It was sent to Soldiers Radio and Television. They aired it for 2 years. And then we also used the single to send out all over the place. Then in 2005, we did another CD release. It was sent out to soldiers around the world. And all this sounds good, but because I was still a divorced man, part-time dad, I was still empty inside. And then I remember one Thanksgiving Day, Forrest came in because we would rotate holidays and all that crazy stuff. And he just said, Dad, I don't want to come over anymore. Then I get a phone call that Dad's sick again. In fact, they called us all up. They didn't think he was going to make it. Dad had fallen at the house, and so we went all up there to where they were living. And then my sister, who at this time lived in Edmond, Oklahoma, or Luther, Oklahoma, close to Edmond, they had us to, she wanted to relocate Mom and Dad, and so they were actually able to get into a nursing home. Even though Mom didn't need the nursing home, Dad did. But they allowed my mom to stay with him, which was amazing and a miracle in itself. But at this time, because of all that had been going on, I was just a mental case, and was just really losing direction. Even though there have been some good things going on with the military, because of my dad's illness. And then not too long after that, my brother and his wife, who had helped my parents out quite a bit, were in a bad car accident. And Rory and Judy, Judy died instantly, and my brother was fighting for his life. And so all this stuff's happening. And it was just, there was a period of time in my life where it was just like, I was like a fish out of water, flopping around, didn't know what was going on. Realizing my life was out of control, had a friend suggest I go to a church, and that's where I started attending a divorce recovery class. But then in 2010, some things had happened where my dad had passed away. My son, even though we did not have a good relationship at this time, he had a good friend through his mom's remarriage, and it was like his step cousin, but they became best friends. And at the age of 13, he had, not my son, but his friend, shot himself and died. So that was January of 2010. And then I lost my job because of all that. I just couldn't keep it together. And so 2010 was a tough year for me. And I'll never forget, I was just like, God, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. And then on April 3rd, 2011, God intervened. And that's where Celebrate Recovery entered into my life. And I can tell you that it's been a long journey. But since then, God has used people to really mentor me, work with me. And I can tell you, ever since April 3rd, 2011, even though there's still bumps in the road and challenges, I can tell you my life has been going up and progress is being made all the time. And I am so grateful. I'm now remarried. I have a good relationship with my son. He's now married, and I'm so grateful. So life still gets crazy at times, as we all know, but I simply allow God to help me, I try not to get distracted to the point where I take my eyes off the prize. So I've learned to be open and real with my feelings and emotions and what's going on around me, but I have now the tools to use through Celebrate Recovery and other people that have been in my life since 2011. And so I can honestly tell you that God never forgot that calling. And so I'm so grateful because God continues to restore my life. He is also restoring my relationship with my son again. And then we're getting ready to take our first vacation in July. And I want to go back to that verse my friend David had in his Bible underlined. It's Philippians 4:4. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. I can say to you, today, now in 2022, there's a lot of good going on in my life. I'm working with veterans still, first responders. I'm on three boards. One's an international ministry board as a consultant. I'm on a state board with the work I do, and then I'm on our church board. And really grateful and humbled about all that. My oldest brother, Steve, he passed away in 2016. We went to his funeral. They had these cards out, and I took several of them. But it said this: life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, wow, what a ride. Many of us on this Celebrate Recovery journey can identify with that. I turned left when I should have gone right. I chose the winding road that led me into the night. Warning signs flash bridges out. Then I heard a voice say, child, turn around. The turn is where I first met Christ. The turn is where I saw the light, and I left it all behind when I made the turn. And there I was made new again. That place is where it all began, and I'll never forget that day when I made the turn. Life's a ride with its mountains and curves, and on this road of life we sow, we reap, and we hurt. But still today there's hope to be found, and it's found in Jesus Christ. So child, turn around. Oh, the turn is where I first met Christ. The turn is where I saw the light, and I left it all behind when I made the turn. And there I was made new again. That place is where it all began, and I'll never forget that day when I made the turn. Some of us, we just have to make that turn every day. Life can be challenging and difficult and hard, but if we keep our eyes on Jesus, He'll help us make that right turn. The turn is where I first met Christ. The turn is where I saw the light, and I left it all behind when I made the turn. And there I was made new again. Oh, that place is where it all began, and I'll never forget that day when I made the turn. Oh, I'll never forget that day when I made the turn. So folks, join me as we go down this journey to make the right turn and just follow Jesus. God bless you. My name's Kerry, and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ.